I thank you everybody for joining us today. Jeremy Fix, the president of the Colorado Corn Administrative Committee, why don't you give us a welcome?
Okay, thank you, Nick. Well, welcome everyone and happy Colorado Ag Day. I'm Jeremy Fix, as Nick told you all. I am president of the Colorado Corn Administrative Committee. And first, I would like to take a moment to thank everyone that joined us today for this spring forum. We know that you're busy and that your time is very valuable, so we hope that today's forum is beneficial to you and brings some value to your operation. We have a great lineup of presentations for you today. We will kick things off with a panel of speakers to discuss our markets here and abroad, which will be moderated by our Executive Director, Nicholas Colglazer. We will follow that up with a brief review of CCAC's 2019 and 2020 year, and then hear an update from Lanny Houston on some pesticide information. After a quick break, we will resume with a presentation by Dr. Brent Young on setting up a corn marketing strategy, and then cap the day off by hearing from the results of two studies the CCAC funded last year. Dr. Riza Kashavars, hopefully I said that correctly, and Dr. Chad Gotze, who will present on residue, soil health, and late season nutrients in corn. A quick reminder for those who attend today's entire forum, you will be eligible to attend a workshop where you can earn core credits necessary to renew your pesticide applicator's license with Sandra McDonald and the Mountain West Pest. That information session will be tomorrow at 10 a.m. Please let Nick know if you are able to attend and if you would like to be added to the seminar. And before we begin today, I'd just like to speak quick to the events that unfolded in Boulder on Monday. Unfortunately, for those of us in Colorado, we are much too familiar with incidents like this, and our hearts are with the families and the victims, as well as the community of Boulder. The last year has shown, possibly more than ever, just how important first responders are to us and how their bravery helps us all in the most dire time of need. My hope is that before blame is pointed and the issue becomes politicized, that we can all open our hearts and try to be more compassionate, more understanding, and more willing to do the little things that will make someone's day a little bit better. I believe our country, our state, and our communities can really benefit from that right now. Our thoughts will be with the victims of Monday's tragedy. So again, with that, thank you for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to Nick to get things going with our expert panel.
Thank you, Jeremy. And yes, thank you for that addition there. And we will kick things off. We've got a lot to do. We've got 4 great panelists to join us here today, and I'll introduce them all, and then we'll let them kind of get into things. We'll give them about 5 minutes or so each to talk about some things important to them, and then we'll go into some questions. And so first we'll start with Cary Sifferath. He serves as the Director of Global Programs for United States Grains Council, a nonprofit organization that promotes the global use of U.S. barley, corn, sorghum, and related products, including ethanol and DDGs. In his capacity, Sifferath is responsible for the oversight of the Council's 10 international offices and worldwide programs. Sifferath has held various positions with the Council for the last 27 years. Besides his current position, he's been the Regional Director for Middle East, Africa, and Europe, China, Japan Director, and South Asia Regional Director, among other positions. We also have with us Nick Lighting, who is a Senior Merchandiser for West Plains LLC in Johnstown, Colorado, with a Master's of Science in Finance from the University of Colorado. His merchandising efforts are focused between Colorado, Southwest Kansas, Western Nebraska, and Utah, trading corn, milo, wheat, and feed ingredients. Other areas of focus include asset and firm valuation, as well as market research for trade areas. Nick has been a member of the CCGA since 2019, serving as an advisory board member, and has presented at district meetings on local and national market influencers for corn. We also have Joe Schuele, is Vice President of Communications for the United States Meat Export Federation. I think I got that right, Joe. Which he joined in 2008 after holding a similar position with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. He was raised on a diversified family farm in central Nebraska and holds a Bachelor of Journalism degree and Master's degree in economics, both from the University of Nebraska. At USMEF, Schuele is responsible for media relations, issues daily bulletins to exporting companies and provides regular updates to USMEF's funding sources on market conditions, promotional activities, and key issues affecting red meat trade. And we also have with us Chris Allen, who joined Dairy Farmers of America, or DFA, as a lot of us know it, in 2008 as a dairy market analyst in Dallas, Texas office, and has since held various positions within the cooperative, primarily in the area of fluid milk marketing. Chris joined the fluid marketing and public policy team in the Kansas City headquarters in 2014 and currently serves as Vice President of Dairy Marketing and Economic Analysis. In this position, he manages various aspects of economic analysis, customer relations, and policies relating to milk marketing. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you all have a lot going on and a lot to say about what's happening here and around the globe. So let's start this off with Mr. Sifferath. Take it away for for 5 minutes or so. I believe you're muted, Cary.
Yep, sorry about that. Thanks, Nick. You want me to share my screen here? Or?
Yes, please.
All right. Yeah. All right, so I'll go through a few slides here just to kind of give you an update or an overview of what's going on globally and the U.S. Feed grains world side of things. Starting here with corn export markets, this is our top 5 export markets for the current 2020-21 marketing year. We're off to a blistering pace of corn sales and even shipments now. China coming in and really buying large chunks of corn and work their way up to over 23 million tons of total corn purchases, of which about 306 million bushels of that has already been shipped to China. You can see that's followed up with what had been our largest customer the last 3 or 4 years, Mexico, followed by Japan, our traditionally for a long time largest export customer for corn, then Colombia and South Korea. I put in the unknown destinations. That's been fairly large. If I even go back 3 weeks, that number was almost double, a little over 8 million tons. And so we've seen some of those unknown destinations become shipments and move in, some to China, but even other countries. And so a lot of people like to think all that unknown destination is China, but the normal guess is about 50% of it. We have seen other markets actually kind of hide their sales in the unknown destination side of things. What does that all mean as far as total exports? USDA still has their overall export projections at 2.6 billion bushels. As of right now today, if I add the 3 million or 121 million bushels of corn sales that we saw the Chinese do last week, if I add that in there, we're already at 97.5% of USDA's projected exports through sale. This is combining both sales and shipments that are on the books. We're just over halfway, 54%, so just over halfway through the marketing year, which means many thought USDA would make an adjustment in the March WAS day. Here in April, I think they almost have to. We got to, even if China doesn't buy another ton of corn, the Japanese and the Mexicans and Colombians, Koreans all have corn they still need to cover yet this marketing year. Places like Mexico, it's, you're almost certain that's going to be U.S. origin, so that it's almost impossible for us to not go over that 66 million or 2.6 billion bushels. And you can see what portion of that, 36.1% of that is or that 950 million bushels coming from China. Last, I'll touch on ethanol. We'll probably get into it a little bit later, but as we look at ethanol exports, and for exports on ethanol, we're always looking at a 2-month lag, and so the latest numbers we have are for January of 21. But we had the 6th largest ever export month for ethanol in January of 2021. And we saw, especially with COVID coming in and what that did to the ethanol industry back in April, May, even throughout the summer, really slowing down overall production and demand for ethanol. And that also had an effect on our exports. We're seeing those exports starting to pick back up here as we moved into calendar year 2021. And the yellow at the bottom, that's to China. We're seeing exports of ethanol going back to China. There's still some tariff issues. There's still some 232 retaliatory tariff issues that are applied to ethanol. What we've heard, I think ADM talked about 200 million gallons of ethanol being sold to China. Based on our discussions with the buyers in the trade, that's a truthful number. And so we expect to see shipments. Well, this is going back to January, but February, March, April, May, June, I think we'll continue to see a few vessels of U.S. ethanol being sailing on their way to China. So it's not just all corn. There are other products, and we're even 244 million bushels of sorghum exports right now, with probably 80–90% of that going to China. And so on the feed grain side of things, it's been a pretty banner year, especially as we see ethanol exports starting to creep back up into the positive side of things. So I'll turn it back to you, Dick.
Great. Thank you so much, Cary. Let's move it down to the grains at a local level. Nick Leidig, please share your screen and take it away and give us a 5-minute overview of some information that you have for us.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. Let's get the slideshow started here. So my big focus, bringing it down to the local level, everything that Cary mentioned, just mentioned, definitely hits us at a local level. This is kind of how our market deals with those changes in export demand for both ethanol and for corn. So 2019 was a pretty typical year for us as far as corn movement goes in the state of Colorado. The yellow line on this yield map kind of shows the break point of where corn starts moving south or starts moving north. I think a lot of the times Northeast Colorado forgets the amount of demand that is in Southern Colorado. And in a typical year, you maybe see some South Yuma County, South Washington County bushels move down that direction, but a lot of it feeds back up to the north, into the Northwest, into Yuma, all the feedlots along Highway 34, and then also up into the Greeley area. I-76, Northeast Colorado, will fly into the Sterling ethanol market, the feedlot market there, and then also ultimately into Greeley. My second slide here shows the corn yield change from 2019 to 2020 at a local level by county here. I do apologize for the blacked out areas. That just meant the year-over-year data from 19 and 20 wasn't available. This paints a pretty good picture of the hardest hit areas. And because of this, the flow of corn and the way basis responded did change. So Southeast Colorado, or South Washington County, getting down into Southeast Colorado, definitely got hit the hardest. Also affecting us was Southwest Kansas, because Kansas and Colorado bushels on the border tend to flow back and forth. And also that spot up in Western Nebraska being down fairly significantly year over year did have some effect on the flow of corn. So here's our corn yield for 2020 map. I drew the yellow line in dots of where it typically is on a normal type year, and you can see how far north it got shifted. Early in the year, November, December, Southern Colorado established early that it needed corn, and we started seeing bushels from Southwest Nebraska and Eastern Colorado, Washington, Yuma counties, all working south. So everything needs to be replaced. There's still demand to be fed. So that Yuma County corn that started moving south, we're starting to see that come more from Western Nebraska and along the I-76 corridor. As I'm sure most of you on here have seen, corn basis has rallied. And I think a lot of that was driven from Southern Colorado demand, as well as Southwest Kansas demand popping its head up really early. So we'll continue to see these effects. This marketing year isn't over yet. Things are starting to normalize a little bit right now. But the first half of this marketing year has been really interesting for basis. One, we've seen it rally, and two, we've seen corn move in directions that we typically don't see it move. The last thing I wanted to touch on is the thought of feeding wheat in Colorado. Southern Colorado and Southwest Kansas are feeding wheat. along Highway 50 down there. It's continuing to be more and more of a talk in southern Colorado. The question is really, what's it going to look like as it gets closer and further north to Weld County and Yuma County, where a lot of demand is. So I ran a quick dry matter, or using what I believe to be actual dry matters for corn and wheat in Yuma County. I'm trying to use market value, market price for this stuff. This is for July, August, Sep of this year. So basically for the wheat price, I'm using what any given shuttle shipper in eastern Colorado or southwest Nebraska can sell wheat for against the carries, likely out to JFM 22, what it would take for them to sell wheat right at harvest time. As you can see, after running through and bringing it to a dry matter basis price per ton, it's pretty competitive. So, basis can't go up forever. There are a few kind of checks and balances in this market. One of which being corn being shuttled in from other states. There's capability of that up along the Front Range, and also obviously the alternative of wheat feeding. So I'm sure we'll touch more on this later, but at least wanted to point out that wheat is feeding in Colorado, it is feeding in Southwest Kansas. It's just a matter of how much. And Nick, I'll pass it back to you here.
Great. Thank you so much, Nick. Greatly appreciate that local insight. Well, let's move over to a local insight on the livestock side of things. So Chris Allen, would you please take it away for a few minutes?
Hey, afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me to give some perspective from the dairy industry. I am going to try to think about this from a national level, not just from DFA's perspective, but obviously if there's any questions on how DFA handled this, I'll be happy to answer those. But again, I think it's just more important to talk about the industry as a whole for this discussion. So I would start with 2020 and the pandemic. We learned some lessons. There's nothing like a crisis to make you realize how good and how bad you are at things. And one of the things that came out of the pandemic was we didn't realize how much people had relied on restaurants for their meals. And so when we saw the restaurants closures, that was about half of people's food consumption was through restaurants. That demand just went away overnight almost. I mean, it was staggered across the country, but basically you had whole states shutting down restaurants. And so there was this huge shift for people to get their meals through retail, through grocery stores. And our supply chain just was not set up for that. I mean, the packaging is different, the labeling is different. And then, just the trucks running the routes, all that stuff was just not set up to make that shift. And so we lost demand. And at the same time, like you folks, we do rely on exports opportunities for our market. And so at the same time as our own states shutting down, we had countries were shutting down and not taking products from the US. And so we just lost a lot of demand in a short window, and milk was lost on the ground. And so you would have seen that national news. There was a lot of milk lost. I think Colorado came out okay, if that's an appropriate word to use. I mean, I'm not going to say it was easy in Colorado, but maybe it was okay compared to what some of the other parts of the country faced. And so that takes us where we are today. 2020 was wild for us. I mean, I don't think anybody could say that 2020 was an okay year. It's just wild. We had extreme highs, extreme lows. And so how did that, I mean, if we look at the averages, things were okay. If you can, stand in front of a group of farmers and say that things are okay about 2020, I guess, I'll do it. But we are seeing milk production is in growth mode. The farms had tough 2020, but they're trying to make up for that right now. And so we are taking advantage of some export opportunities as China, just like the previous slide show, China is a big export market for us. They're in buying mode, and so we're taking advantage of that, but we are hurt by the port issues. We're struggling to get container ships to move our products, and so that's kind of limiting our ability to take advantage of these markets. But I'd say, again, maybe it's okay to use the word okay, and so we're okay right now, we're in good shape, but you guys are saying, okay, Chris, what do I need to think about for 2020? What's going on with the cows? Are they going to be around or what? So I think 2021 is going to be okay. We have good demand right now, even though we have strong supply. Our retail demand has still been very strong. Our food service demand, the restaurant recovery should be there. We're seeing the slow increase in capacity across the country, and so restaurants are coming back. People are, the weather's nice. People are wanting to get out of their houses. They're happy. They're vaccinated. They're happy to go back and sit in a restaurant with other people. So we think that's going to be really good for our industry. And exports are still there. The global market is still good for dairy to move product, and we expect to take advantage of that. So we're seeing some tight margins though on farms. We are at some pretty low prices. for milk, and feed costs are up a little bit. I'm not going to pick on you guys. I'm glad you guys are seeing some good markets, but they are up for us, and so margins are tough right now. But we do think those margins will have an impact on the cow numbers. So we look at the national herd, we're at a pretty high level. We'll probably see a little bit of drop in the national herd just because of those tough margins for a few months, and then we think the herd will recover. But I don't think there's going to be a big swing. We're not talking about these aren't big numbers when we're talking about just maybe a slowdown in the herd growth and then some recovery. So that's a national level. What does this all mean for Colorado? You guys have a strong dairy market. If you look at the last 10 years, huge growth in Colorado, almost 70% increase from where we were in 2009 to 2019 in milk production. You're one of the top 15 states nationally for milk production. And when you look at the cows, you're number 2 in the nation for most productive cows, which means your cows are probably not out on grass. They're being fed in the bunker. And so that's going to be a lot of commodity use, the feed commodity. So corn is a big part of that. And so I think that's hopefully good for you guys. And we do see a lot of new and modern large facilities that have been built recently in Colorado. And that just speaks to the longevity of that industry. We do think dairy is going to have a good opportunity. And, if California wants to make it tougher and tougher to be a dairyman and put tough regulations on it, then that just makes Colorado a nicer place to go. So do think dairy is going to have some good, a lot of good opportunities going forward. So that's my update.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris, for that update. Good to know that there'll still be lots of cows around. So, now to move on to kind of a global scale in the animal marketing and protein realm, Joe, take it away for a few minutes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, first I wanted to talk just a little bit more about what USMEF does. We're pretty well known as the international marketing arm for U.S. beef, pork, and lamb. I'd like to emphasize some of the other functions that we're less known for. We work a lot on technical services and market access. In other words, smoothing out the obstacles that can keep U.S. red meat from getting to its destinations promptly. That requires a lot of behind the scenes work. It's not always the most glamorous work, but we have excellent relationships with USDA and USTR, and we put a lot of resources toward keeping that product moving. Also, our market intelligence. I am very blessed to work with members of our international staff, some of whom have been with USMEF for more than 20 years, many more than 20 years, and some of them more than 30 years. And their insights on the market is always of great value to our members, as well as to the US government when they're looking at trade relations, trade negotiations. And so we are relied upon to provide that kind of intelligence. Another thing I like to emphasize is that from our standpoint, meat exports really help maximize carcass value by complementing what is really a robust domestic market. Unlike some other meat exporting countries, we don't look to the rest of the world to take the majority of our red meat production. We export about 14% of our beef and around 29% of our pork production. And so the majority is consumed here, but by getting various cuts and variety meat items to the markets that value them the most, we feel that translates to profits all the way down the supply chain and down to the farm and ranch level. Also, we feel like exports do help drive industry expansion, and that's evidenced by the current production levels. We're at very high levels of production right now for both US beef and pork. Looking back at 2020, it was a pretty good year, all things considered. Pork exports really had a record-shattering year. We had just approached $7 billion before last year. Last year we hit $7.71 billion. And people might say, well, wasn't that driven by the African swine fever related shortage in China? I would say in the first half of 2020 that was true. Most of the growth was China driven. But in the second half, we were really pleased to see a good rebound in some other key markets like Japan, Mexico, Central America was very strong throughout the year, and a real surge in demand in Southeast Asia. And so I would say that we achieved a pretty broad-based growth, at least in the second half of 2020. And as I said, for the year, breaking records by double digits. Now, beef exports were down 5% from the previous year. We reached $7.65 billion. We've been as high as $8.3 billion. That would have been in 2018. Demand for beef was pretty resilient in the Asian markets, where we saw a bit of a slump. COVID-related slump was more emphatic in markets where disposable income is a little more scarce, where the overall beef demand depends more on the food service sector, the hospitality sector, and maybe a thriving tourism sector. That's where we saw beef demand take the hardest hit from COVID. We get in the Asian markets, we saw really, certainly their food service sectors were hit hard as well, but perhaps not for as long a period of time. And also you saw a real surge in retail sales. Those markets, you tend to see enough disposable income that, much like what happened in the United States, people decided, well, if I can't go to restaurants, I want high quality items at the retail level. So from that standpoint, I would say that the beef demand in Asia held up quite well. We did take a hit in some other parts of the world. And that pattern is continuing into early 2021, but we think that will smooth out as the year goes on. Overall, looking ahead to 2021, we still feel we can achieve modest growth in pork. We're not going to have double-digit growth this year because our demand from China is likely to moderate. Now, demand from China is not going to fall off a cliff as their domestic production recovers from the impact of African swine fever. We look for 2021 to still be far and away the second largest year of exports we've ever had to China for pork, but it will not likely hit the levels that we saw in 2020. Now, the U.S. industry is actually better equipped to weather China's pork production recovery than our competitors are. We are by far the least China dependent of the world's major pork exporters. In 2020, about 1/3 of our export volume went to China. And while that is unusually high, most of the major exporters, when you look at Europe, Canada, Chile, Brazil, their percentage of exports going to China range anywhere from 45% to up to 75%. And so as China's production recovers, we feel that we are very well positioned to weather that better so than our other pork competitors. Now, on beef exports, if things fall our way in 2021, we do anticipate double-digit growth. We think that we could be a record year up in the $8.5 billion range. But of course, we'll need to see a steady recovery of the global food service sector. We're already seeing that in a lot of places, but we need to see a broader recovery in food service. Right now, food service in Asia, still not back to normal, but certainly back to a very lively level of activity. Latin America, not as much. And of course, Europe has gone over, many countries in Europe have undergone just another recent round of shutdowns in the restaurant sector. And so all of those things create some headwinds, but we do think that as the year goes on, beef demand will recover very well. We do have some concerns. While we're feeling good about the demand side, we do have some supply side concerns. Chris mentioned the port congestion. That is a growing concern for our exporters. We're really having a difficult time getting product out of the West Coast ports promptly. Our product is moving, but not on the schedule that we'd like it to. That not only is a concern for exporters, it starts to wear on the minds of our buyers in Asia. Now, we're not the only country that has this problem. Other exporting countries are also experiencing container shortages and capacity shortages and port congestion, but it is a concern. And even pre-COVID, we had very tight labor supply at the plant level, and COVID exacerbated that with the restrictions, the distancing restrictions for workers, and some of the ability to operate at full capacity. That that intensified an already tight labor supply. And what happens there is we often see some products that would normally get boxed and exported for human consumption will fall by the wayside. Now, they don't completely go to waste, but you're going to see more of those products. In 2020, we saw more of those products, especially the variety meat items, go into pet food and other uses, so that none of that, even if that product is exported, that does not qualify as red meat exports. We'd like to get back to the point where we've got the labor available to get all of that product overseas, because even those what might be perceived as low value variety meat items, they certainly command a lot better demand, a lot more interest overseas than they do here. Beef livers is probably a good example. We move beef livers overseas for what would seem to be a pretty low price, but it's certainly better than paying someone to come pick them up, which would probably be the case if you were having to rely on domestic demand. So we're hoping to see that labor situation get a little better as more workers get vaccinated, as plants can operate more at full capacity. But right now it is definitely a concern, and it definitely impacted our overall results in 2020. That's what I have. And so I'll turn it back to Nick.
Awesome. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for that overview of what we've got going on. So let's kind of just kick things off with some questions. And, we'll first set the stage by taking a look back, as many of you mentioned in your opening statements. About a year ago, we plunged into this global pandemic, and COVID spared no industry. Ag was definitely included in that. So a lot of you mentioned this, with all of the disruptions and uncertainty that we saw, what's the biggest takeaway that you saw from 2020 and the impact of COVID? And we'll start right back with you, Joe.
I think one of the biggest takeaways is I feel like we really showed how resilient our processing industry is in terms of product safety. When we were hit with some plant closures and plant slowdowns back in, I would say, mid-April through about the end of May, there was a lot of concern how long it would take to get that production back up. And of course, you had that was really impacting people at the farm level. You had pigs being euthanized, you had cattle having to stay in the feedlots longer, well after they were market ready. And so that really had the potential to be a catastrophic situation. But our processing industry responded well. We got back up to full, close to full capacity in a relatively short period of time. So I think that was a big takeaway, is that our industry really weathered a pretty big storm there. Another takeaway I would say is that from a global standpoint, the moving meat through e-commerce channels, we've always really just kind of scratched the surface. I mean, there's been some meat moved that way, both in the food service and retail sector, but it was never, compared to consumer goods, never really took off. I think that you really saw that happen in 2020, and I think a lot of the e-commerce trends that were pandemic driven, we can learn from those, and we can capitalize them on them in a big way going forward.
Bringing meat sales into the 21st century. I love it. So, Chris, you mentioned, kind of the setup of the dairy industry. You mentioned that you weren't quite set up for the shift. Did you take, there was a takeaway from that, or was there something bigger that you saw in your industry that you could take away from this last year?
Yeah, thanks. We did learn about the reliance of the supply chain on this kind of even split between food service or restaurants and grocery, and so that's been an educational tool for all of us. I don't know that we could say there's the industry's maybe been a little bit better at being adaptable, but I can't say there's been any major shifts in how we produce foods or how we deliver it. But one of the other things we learned was that government intervention is not always the best thing. I'm not trying to say the government's completely wrong, but I mean, the food box program, if you guys are familiar with it, it was a good concept. It hit the right things. People lost their jobs, people lost their sources of revenue, and those people were connected with the farmers who lost their markets. And you know, you can't think of a better way to, hey, let's put two people together. But the way it was implemented, the way it was rolled out, it just had these extreme demand surges and just really, I want to say, wreaked havoc on our markets and our industry. And so that was a tough one. And so that was a lesson learned. We've learned how to communicating to the government, you know, this is a good program, but here's what you could have done better. So we've been doing a lot with that, especially with the new administration, just letting them know not where it went wrong, but where it could be improved. And then also we learned that, you know, this whole concept of touching paper, our industry still relies on a lot of paper stuff. And then we had started a pilot program, and part of our, and actually in Colorado, you got that region is one of the first in DFA to do this pilot program where we're moving our manifest, our documents that we pick up our farm milk, we've moved that to electronic format. And our customers love that during the pandemic. They said, wait a minute, I don't have to sign a manifest. I don't have to hand this paper around or make copies or fax it and all that stuff. And so that was huge. And so that was another big lesson learned, that moving electronically does have a lot more benefits than we realized. So those are the big ones for us.
Great. Thank you for that insight, Chris. So we'll move over to the grain side on the local level. Nick, kind of show, you know, what was some of the takeaways from 2020 that you saw, and, you know, was it mostly COVID, or did the drought have a big impact on that? And can you separate the two?
Yeah, so I mean, when you come back to what we see on our on-farm prices in Colorado, you know, March, April, May of 2020, you know, you're already adding in what the USDA reported as a large crop. You're adding in a whole lot of demand destruction, not just on a national level, but a local level. And that was the driver for us. So you already have low futures prices. And then, you know, you have ethanol plants shut down due to demand destruction in ethanol and gasoline. You have demand destruction on the feedlot side. So you're losing your homes, or the places that you can kind of shove corn into, if you will. So you saw front end basis take a pretty big nosedive. And when you combine that with, you know, low futures prices, and if people are sitting in a situation where they hold on to their corn, you know, January through May, that sort of time frame, they're kind of getting the worst of it. So first half of 2020 at a local level, I'd say, you know, we really had a lot to work through logistically and price wise. Back half of the year, as futures started to normalize a little bit, we had a little bit of mean reversion on the board. You start to feel a little bit better about the positives that came out of it. And, you know, the things that we were kind of waiting for, a rally, I would say locally and nationally, first half of the year, came to fruition a little bit more last half of 2020.
Man, it's good to hear some positive news that came towards the end of that year. And Cary, would you mind tacking on to that from the global level?
Yeah, well, when COVID first hit, there was a lot of concerns of, even from our international customers, our U.S. ports going to stay open? Can you still load grain vessels? Is the government inspectors going to be there to inspect it and all that? And we were very, very forthcoming and trying to reach out and answer those questions. But the good thing about grain, it's not as labor intensive, and so we didn't have the issues that maybe the meat sector had. So it doesn't take a lot of people to load shuttles or barges or grain vessels. So the social distancing and those kind of things didn't really affect. Didn't see much slowdown in grain movement. You did have, you already had ASF affecting, grain demand in places like China, Vietnam, even others, Philippines, Thailand. It started moving across other Southeast Asia countries. And then, COVID hits, and what does that do to demand, livestock demand, meat, milk, and egg demand around the world? And then what does that do for demand for feed grain exports from the U.S.? We've seen some countries slow down, others not as much or very little. China coming in and buying starting last June, July is really kind of swept over maybe some of the losses that you saw in a place like Peru or something. And then you've seen adjustments, places like Indonesia or Mexico. Consumers, they're not eating as much chicken or other meat products. But egg consumption goes through the roof because eggs are a cheaper source of animal protein to the people who are losing their jobs or having less income coming in. And so, and you actually feed a heck of a lot of corn to a layered ration normally. And so that kind of even smoothed over some of the setbacks you might have seen in overall meat demand in some of these markets that we export feed grains to. I guess the biggest issue, and Nick already talked about it a bit, the ethanol side of things, with the gasoline demand slowing down, not just here in the US, but globally, what that did for ethanol demand, or even, if you remember last May, you were trading oil in Texas at a negative number. We went from US ethanol being the cheapest oxygenate globally to being, way more expensive than MTBE and other oxygenates. And so that really hurt export demand. And then as ethanol production slowed down in the US, that means less DDGS available. And so even customers that wanted it were having hard times finding it because we were, shutting down or shutting back production a bit on ethanol. That's kind of, again, rectified itself with a lot of plants coming back online. Looks like even a few more will come back online here on April 1st. And so things are somewhat, for the most part, back to normal. And then just, again, China coming in and just kind of making up for anything that you may have lost in some of the other countries.
Yeah, China did come in quite big this year, as you've seen. So we're going to take not a break, but I am going to throw a poll question up that I'd like everybody to take a moment to answer. And it's just a true false. You're not going to get it graded on this. But I also want to let you know that if you do have some questions, look down at the bottom of your Zoom window and there is a Q&A tab. Click on that and you can ask your questions in there. And we'll put those in front of the panelists and we'll get those answered for you if there's some time. And so as we kind of move along, we'll kind of just build on what we were talking about of, we look back, saw some impacts of COVID, what are we seeing now? And what are we even possibly going to see into the 21-22 marketing year? And so we'll just kind of go back through the order backwards and start with you, Cary, on, a global perspective on, you mentioned a lot about China and some of those other things. Where do you see this going, and what are we seeing now that's positive for our corn farmers here in Colorado?
A lot of people thinking this China demand, and we've seen it other times, and boom, it comes and then it shuts off like that. Joe talked about how they're actually quite, a little bit happy that not a huge percentage of their pork exports are to China like some of the other markets. Our sorghum sector saw that, 80-90% of your exports going to China, and they put on an anti-dumping case and things shut off. And so it's good to have big markets like that, but they can, especially when it's China itself, where they have had a history of turning things on and turning things back off almost as quickly. Right now, we don't think that this is a short-term thing on the China demand for corn. I don't know that we're going to sell 20-25 million tons year on year, but ASF has definitely shifted things. They shut off feeding of restaurant and food waste in China. We've seen that adding about 30 to 40 million tons of added feed demand by taking that feed waste off the market. That's predominantly then corn and soybean meal related demand. And so you're moving the new facilities that are coming up are much more modern, and they're feeding a much higher corn and soybean level ration. And so a lot of people say backyard. I wouldn't say but smaller farmers that we're feeding 500, 800,000 head of hogs that have gotten out of that business. That's where a lot of that kind of food waste feeding was going on. Although a lot of those guys, they're now feeding broilers out in those houses, those hog houses they had. And so they're still creating demand. But it's not all China. It's, we continue to see Mexico as a growing market. Southeast Asia, we have on the corn side, we have a lot of strong competition from our South American neighbors or competitors for corn, especially in the big Vietnam market. But we're seeing just very, very large growth of DDGS exports into that Southeast Asia market. Japan, Korea, Taiwan, long time big corn importers continuing to show some strong demand. And then, if you look at Colombia, where we have that FTA and an advantage on corn tariffs into there, they continue to Columbia, they're pretty much slightly growth this year over last year. But when you look at how hard hit some of these South American countries have been by COVID, that's actually a pretty good thing. If I add up all the South or Central America countries, Guatemala, Honduras, Costa Rica, Panama, those are all very good, strong customers of U.S. corn, and we see that holding pretty steady here through COVID, and expect them to grow when they come back out of COVID. So there's still a lot of growth opportunities. Even Egypt, other parts of North Africa that we see, besides just only talking about growth in China.
Great, thank you so much for that. Let's shift over to the national stage on the livestock side of things. So Joe, kind of looking at this upcoming year, you mentioned, we saw good year for pork, but tailed off in beef. What do you see coming this year and maybe into the next marketing year, 2021, 22?
Well, on the beef side in 2021, we're hoping to be able to more fully capitalize on a couple of very important agreements that went into place, that entered into force in early 2020. One being the US-Japan agreement, which put us back on a level tariff playing field with our competitors on both the beef and pork side. And then the phase one agreement with China, which actually officially took effect in February of last year, but the red meat trade provisions took effect actually just about 1 year ago. We're kind of at the 1 year anniversary of that. And as I talked about, pork to China probably softening a bit in 2021, we've really just scratched the surface on beef demand in China. The phase one agreement really gives us meaningful access to the Chinese market for the first time. We officially got post BSE access in 2017, but there were so many restrictions and there were so many trade tensions between the two countries that really to produce for the Chinese market didn't attract a lot of interest at either the farm level or the exporter level. But the phase one agreement changed that. And while China still has some unique requirements that we need to meet, there's a lot of interest there from both Chinese buyers and from exporters that for the first time really see China as a viable beef market. And we see it jumping into our top 5 markets in 2021. In Japan, we feel again, as we have a little bit of an issue with a safeguard, a higher tariff being triggered through the middle of April. So we'll need to work through that, but we see good, strong prospects in Japan. In Korea, we weren't quite at a record level last year, but we still continue to derive great benefits from the Korea-US trade agreement. And Taiwan has been a superstar market for us. The beef consumption per capita in Taiwan of US beef is the highest in the world. We really still look for good things to happen there. As far as some of the less developed countries, I'm talking most about established markets. We feel that there are really good prospects for US beef in Africa. So far, most of the buying there has been in the variety meat, livers, hearts, kidneys, that kind of thing. But we think we can move significant volumes of beef muscle cuts into Africa, especially looking at some of the ungraded beef from older animals. We think that there's potential there in Africa. And also we, for the first time in 2020, had a US specific duty-free quota going into Europe. We're excited about that. The European restaurant sector was just really devastated in 2020 by COVID restrictions. So we really were not able to capitalize on that quota in 2020. But as Europe pulls itself out of its lockdowns, we think there are good prospects there. Now, one good side of that, it forced us to focus a little more on the retail side in Europe. It's always been so expensive to produce beef for the European market that almost all of it ended up in the white tablecloth restaurant sector. We have been moving more and more of it into the higher end retail outlets, but we're still pretty restaurant dependent in Europe. And we think we could see a good recovery there.
That's very good to hear. Is sometimes it's probably the easiest way to export corn from Colorado is in the form of animal protein. So kind of moving on to the local level, Chris, why don't you kind of give us that perspective from your area in the livestock side on what you're seeing in the upcoming year. You mentioned that the cow herd is still going to be mostly there, and that means we're going to have local mouths to feed, which is a good thing.
That's right. Well, anyways, I was going to try to put a slide up, but now I'm afraid of technology, so I'm not going to try to mess with it. I'll probably crash the whole meeting, so just forget it. But yeah, as I say, Colorado's had strong growth, and actually, if we looked at the last 10 years of the trend in dairy production across the country, really everything in the western half of the U.S. has really strong growth. Maybe California is the one exception to that, but that whole western half of the U.S. So the states around Colorado also growing pretty strongly. Idaho, Texas is a huge growth state right now, and so I think that speaks volumes with your for your local farms and their ability to ship to those growing markets around them. And so I'd say that dairy in the western half of the U.S., Colorado specifically, strong opportunity, lots of new facilities being built, and you don't just build a new plant with the expectation that you're not going to keep it running full for a while. So definitely dairy has good opportunity in that part of the world.
Great, thank you, Chris. And Nick, local thoughts on or thoughts from the local level from you.
Yeah, I mean, upcoming year, I think we've got a lot of pricing opportunities. I think the recovery of demand that Joe, Cary, and Chris are kind of hitting on does ultimately do something good for us, right? So at the end of the day, as demand recovers, we're to find ways to price ourselves competitively. And Colorado specifically, I think, has a unique opportunity to meet more of its own demand. I mean, we have some very deficit counties, importing counties in the state, and as we continue to produce more efficiently and treat the market more efficiently, we'll see more of those opportunities arise. This year is an example of the kind of northeast corridor taking care of southern Colorado, so southern Colorado district into Kansas. That all pays off. It's all connected to trends, but more demand means higher basis at the end of the day. Additionally, our producers continue to diversify on their end as well, relying less and less on 2 or 3 standard crops. The sorghum market's grown quite a bit. Milo market's grown quite a bit. Again, you start taking a little bit of supply out, that could mean higher on farm prices as well.
Great, thank you, Nick. So it sounds like there's lots of opportunities and some positive movement, which is really nice. After coming out of a year and a few years that ag has seen in the past. So this is a bit of a 2-part question. What are you seeing that is being done or could be done to protect and even expand our current markets? And what is the biggest need for you or for who you work for our Colorado corn farmers and for you to be successful in that? And so we'll start with Chris on that one, and we'll kind of go through that lineage.
Yeah, I would say the volatility and the price is probably. I mean, we know we can't control the weather, so many things that are out of our control. But when your market is extreme, it's next to impossible to be prepared for that. And so even the best farms are hurt by those extreme markets. And so I don't know how I can sit here and ask for you guys to help with that, but I think that's always something we're trying to work with our farmers through risk management programs, making those opportunities more readily available. Anything that they can do to help hedge or protect their risk. And so the government's got some good programs out right now for dairy farmers that have been helpful. And so I know that there's probably something similar on the feed side that allows you guys to help hedge some of your risk and maybe even out those highs and lows. But yeah, that's always the biggest challenge for us, I think. And then, keeping people interested in milk. That's another big one for us. And I think big for you guys as well, that you want to know the cows are going to be needed. So we try to do what we can to make sure milk has a good image in the public eye and that people keep consuming it. And so those are the big ones for us.
Yep. Got milk? I hope so. So Nick, how about that at a local level? What are you seeing? Chris mentioned risk management. Do you have programs out there? Fun fact, we're actually going to have Brent Young talk about marketing corn in 2021. And so Nick, what are you seeing as things that you could expand or protect markets that we have here at the local level? and what you as a local could do, maybe even further up on the federal and global level.
Yeah, I mean, if you've, I'm sure people watching have sat in, I did some presentations last year with Colorado Corn. I mean, I'm all about being an active marketer. I think, as fun and sexy as it might be to sell 50,000 bushels in one big whack because you're getting a big level for it, doesn't mean you should. There's nothing wrong with selling 5 and 10 lots on the way up. And that's the way I approach it. I think the people that I've found that are most successful marketers look at it that way, that it's not about hitting the highs, it's about being the one that's most active in the market and having a feel for what the market's doing. As far as expanding opportunities or, what I'm looking for on the merchandising level to, make the basis market more efficient in a sense would be just a bit of flexibility. Be open to new ideas, whether it's how you ship, when you ship, the time frame that you're looking to do something. If you're typically somebody that likes to deliver, there may be a better market that's 200 or 300 miles away that we want to pick up the corn on your farm. Because I don't think you want to spend 600 miles a day in the truck. So, just being open and willing to look at new ideas that usually pays dividends. I'm a firm believer that if you take on more risk, you deserve a higher reward. So, it's one of those things where, try to capture that reward when you can.
Great advice, Nick. So Cary, kind of the same question to you. U.S. Grains does a lot of this. I mean, you look at some of the issues that you guys are facing with Mexico, where they, looked at banning glyphosate and GM crops for human consumption, and there's a lot of confusion around that. So, that protect and expanding current markets is right up your alley. And so, can you give us your thoughts on that?
You kind of hit on what I was going to use as an example. That glyphosate and GM corn for food or human consumption, and there's a lot of even debate about what that actually means. Does that include corn for livestock feed or not? And we're working. There's a coalition on the ground in Mexico, and there's a coalition going on here in the U.S. Working to against that. There was even a letter put out by several ag industries that the Grain Council was one of, and NCGA was as well. President AMLO actually made some public comments last night about it. If you've seen any of that, it's all in Spanish, but it's kind of interesting. But yeah, Colorado corn and corn farmers, your support of U.S. Grain Council and NCGA, both financially through the checkoff system, but even your time and effort and taking part in our programs and our membership to be able to fight these kind of things. And it's, you hit on Mexico. I spent half of my day yesterday talking on MRL, maximum residue level issues in 2 different countries. And that's going to be, it already is the new kind of trade policy issue of different countries setting different MRL levels for various ag chemicals that you guys use on a regular basis. Besides Mexico wanting to ban glyphosate, if another country wants to put a residue level so low that it basically almost is becomes a ban, because if we start finding residues on corn or soybeans or wheat or other things, it can and has shut down trade. And so and those things just seem to be popping up faster than we could address them. 20 years ago, you maybe dealt with 1 or 2 of those a year. Now I think I deal with 1 or 2 a week. So it's just an ongoing issue. And again, Colorado corn is your support through the Grain Council, through NCGA to help us attack those both on a domestic and an international level is key.
Well, thank you, Cary. We do love working alongside of NCGA and U.S. Grains Council. You guys do amazing work on behalf of the corn farmers, not just in Colorado, but across the United States. And so we'd be in a lesser place without you. Before we get Joe's take, I'll just remind everybody there is a poll question up on where Colorado ranks in top in beef exports. Please answer that so we can get that closed out. And if you do have some questions, please open that tab there on the Q&A or raise your hand, and we'll try and get to you as we do probably have some time for some questions from the audience. So Joe, your take on expanding and protecting those markets that you have access to that benefit Colorado corn producers, because as I said, it's probably the easiest way to export corn from Colorado.
Well, Cary gave some great examples of technical barriers to trade. I could probably go on for a couple of hours on some of those that we face on the meat side. Rather than do that, I'll shift the focus a little bit to the tariffs that we face. Things have gotten better, but we still really face some high tariffs throughout the world. Right now, U.S. pork is technically subject to a 50% retaliatory duties in China. There's been a waiver process that's reduced that down to 25%. We think most importers have been able to do that. On the beef side, we think most importers have been able to get also a 25% tariff waived, but that still puts us in a really tenuous position. If China would decide to discontinue those tariff waivers, puts us in a really rough spot. A good example right now, the Senate in the Philippines is debating over whether they're going to reduce. They are facing an unprecedented shortage of pork in their country, and yet they're having this elongated debate over whether they'll let more pork into the country at only a 30% tariff instead of 40%. And it's very frustrating because you see this, people think that they're protecting their domestic industries. And in real life, it doesn't really play out that way. Cary was talking about good, strong feed demand in places like South Korea and Colombia. Those are two shining examples of countries that reduced their tariffs on red meat imports and have actually seen their domestic production thrive in either a tariff-free or a lower tariff environment. Korea, almost all of the pork that Korea imports from anywhere now enters the country duty-free, and yet they had record large pork production last year. So these policies that are well intended to keep domestic producers in business, they really, I think, a lot of times stop the domestic industry from being innovative and being competitive. And so we'd really like to see more liberalization of trade on the tariff side. And as I said, it's improved a lot in the last 15 or 20 years, but we still face some really, really high tariffs across the country. And that's really just artificially inflating the price of our product when it goes into these foreign countries. So we really appreciate the support of the producer organizations in helping us address that and being supportive of trade agreements, because if meaningful trade agreements are going to get through our Congress, if they're going to get ratified by our Congress, agriculture tends to do the heavy lifting.
That is the truth. So thank you for that. So we will close out the poll, and we have a 16-2 vote, and it is true. A lot of us found out this last week with the meat in days that happened on the 20th of March, that Colorado is actually the number 4 exporter, exporting over $1 billion worth of beef every year. And so, that has a lot of times fed with Colorado corn, as we've seen from the nation, a lot of times Kansas corn as well. And so thank you guys for participating in that. But yes, we are in the top 5. We are actually in the top 4 beef exporting states in the United States. So it's good to know. And we'll bring some more ag facts as we come through here. So we are getting close to time. We've got about another 10 minutes left or so, and I want to make sure we keep this on track. And so I'm going to ask for some final comments from our gallery here, our Hollywood Squares gallery of great panelists. So Chris, how about we start with you? Give us a little wrap up and some thoughts on our markets, where we're going, what we're seeing, and what that means for our industry and ag.
Yeah, and thanks again for having me. So I've heard a lot of talk about China today. I was not anticipating this much conversation about China. It's been kind of nice to hear that you guys think a lot about China too. So we've been burned as well, like you folks, and so we've been a lot smarter to think about how we develop those relationships. We are facing some of the tariffs issues, like the corn is, but we are subject to sometimes the global marketplace can be just as bad as a domestic marketplace. And so Mideast has been a great opportunity for the U.S. They have a growing Western diet, but when oil prices are low, they tend to not buy stuff from the U.S. And same thing with South Korea, where we see a big Westernized diet there. And so it's been some great opportunities, but we're still trying to learn how to, they think of cheese differently than we do and how they put it in their meals. And so we're trying to figure out how that works. And so again, I think the punchline is what I'm trying to get to is that we are becoming smarter and more savvy about how to take advantage of that global market and how to be bigger players in there. And that's where the real opportunities are for dairy. And it's been something that not just DFA is thinking about, but the industry. And so we're doing a really good job of being more vested into that global market and less focused on the domestic market. Not that we're ignoring the domestic market. I'm just saying we're trying to seek those better opportunities, and they are out there. And so that's where we're looking towards. And that's it.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you, Chris. And you were right. Everything is definitely better with cheese. So, Nick, how about you give us some closing thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think, we've had a very volatile year, both price-wise at the local level and at the national level. With this volatility comes opportunity. I can only recommend continue to be active marketers. I think the summer is going to be super interesting with wheat feeding in southern Colorado, as I had mentioned, and how we're going to kind of bridge the gap between old crop and new crop. So again, that's going to take a bit of activeness at the farm level to make sure you stay on top of it, understand what's happening in your market, and what it's likely going to do to your basis price or your on-farm price. I tell this to everybody: eat beef. That's the best thing we can do here locally. There's a lot of China talk, and that's all great. It all connects together. More export demand means higher prices for us at home. But at the end of the day, supporting and being proponents of our local market is the best thing you can do. I'm pretty proud of how I think Colorado in general handled the pandemic as a whole. You look back a year from where we are today, I wasn't sure that we'd be sitting in this situation right now with still the amount of market opportunities that we have, given how bad it got there. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. Greatly appreciate you coming on. And as I like to say, hashtag eat all the meats. So help support Colorado corn farmers by indulging yourself in some wonderful proteins on the grill this summer. To that, let's talk about proteins across the globe. Joe, how about your wrapping up thoughts?
Well, first, I just want to say I can't thank producers enough from all of the sectors that support USMEF. I can't thank them enough for standing by us through all of the volatility of 2020, because frankly, we couldn't do a lot of the things that we had planned. I mean, your in-person trade shows largely went away. You couldn't bring trade teams over from overseas the way you normally do. Couldn't do a lot of the in-person trainings for extended periods of time. So we had to adapt. We had to do a lot of things differently, and our funding sources really stood behind us. And I think as we get back into a lot of the face-to-face in-person things that we're missing in 2020, we did learn a lot. We came up with a lot of virtual training sessions, for example, virtual tours of the U.S. industry that we could provide to buyers. And those innovations won't go away. I think we can combine a lot of what we learned by necessity, combine those with a lot of our traditional activities. We still want to get back to face-to-face meetings, promoting the really great products. But I just did want to say thank you, because our funding sources really stood behind us and understood that we had to adapt to some difficult times.
Absolutely, Joe. And we're happy to partner with you on so many different areas. You guys have done some great things moving international markets, which then is a great value to our producers right here in Colorado. So thank you for your hard work. And as you said, adapt and overcome. So Cary, last but not least, your thoughts and takeaways.
Sure, and thanks, Nick, for having me here today, and thanks to Colorado Corn for the great support you give to the Grand Council throughout the year. And I'll follow up a little bit what Joe said. Those transitions of having to move to a virtual world and replace in-person programming. We've done a lot of that, and won't get into all of that. And same as USMEF, we've learned there may be new ways to go about things, and we can probably have a mixture of both in-person and virtual type of programming going forward. The only other thing I'll talk about is U.S. Grain Council. We even have a whole section of our website that talks about it and tracks it, is U.S. feed grain exports in all forms. And so, Joe hit on, what South Korea has done and how that's led to them being a great export market for U.S. pork and beef. At the same time, it's been a good market for, it's in our top 5 for U.S. corn. I think it's the second or third largest export market for U.S. DDGS today. And so, yeah, as you said, most of Colorado corn exports is going to go out of the country as beef, and U.S. Grain Council is happy to be shipping corn out in any and all form: beef, milk, eggs, pork, ethanol, DDGS, or in its actual raw form as corn. So we're behind all of it. So thanks again for having me today.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, all for jumping on and giving us so much of your time, and continue the good work that you do on behalf of agriculture here in Colorado and across the nation, promoting it here and the globe and giving us so many options. As you all kind of mentioned, you know, we all had to deal with COVID and the ramifications of that pandemic that followed. And I think agriculture really came out of this very well in the grand scheme of things. We were able to improvise, adapt, and overcome. And that's something that ag has done throughout the years. Whether it's because of weather, whether it's because of price, whether it's because of technology change, we've always been able to improvise, adapt, and overcome. And we really had to do that here on a very grand global scale to remain successful. And I think that not only did we succeed, we really knocked the top of it off. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. We're actually going to stay on time. And if there's anything that you guys need, or if anybody wants to contact you, let me know and we'll put you in touch if there's further questions for our panelists. And I did end up sharing the website that you mentioned, Cary, the Grain in All Forms, in the chat. Go ahead, check that out. I've got that bookmarked because it is a great source of information. And if any of the panelists would like to share some information, feel free to throw that up in the chat. So thank you, gentlemen. And we'll move on to our next topic. And that's going to be our president, Jeremy Fix. I'm going to turn that back over to you to do an annual review of our 2019-2020 year from the Colorado Corn Administrative Committee. I will also be sharing, just so you know, our annual report link, so you can go ahead and click on that and view it online and even download it electronically to follow along to see some of the things that Jeremy is talking about as we go on. So, gentlemen, thank you.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Nick. Well, 2020, 2019, our fiscal year was very interesting. It began with us saying thank you and goodbye to our former executive director, Mark Sponsler, for his 13 years of service to Colorado Corn Administrative Committee. He decided he wanted to retire and move on to other aspects of his life, and that opened up the position for us to hire Nick, and we're sure thankful that we did. We hired Nick in January, and not long after, as many of you know, COVID hit, and it evolved into a global pandemic and kind of shut things down, unfortunately. But Colorado Corn did not hesitate. It did not hesitate. We pivoted and were able to provide timely updates and information to our members, trying to navigate the issue of the virus. We did many things. We stayed busy. When it comes to communication and outreach, we were very pleased to be there to provide information on COVID-19, SBA loans, whether it be EI, DL, PPP, the CARES package, CFAP payments. We did all these things and still did normal business like research and market development, regulatory affairs. When it comes to research, we were proud to fund in over $100,000 of research projects that included reduced tillage and residue, soil health, nutrient and weed management, irrigation, and salinity issues. 2 projects that we had funded in the past were finalized, and the reports were submitted to Colorado Corn for our viewing. These included the edge of field monitoring study that took part over a few years, as well as the Fumin-Nonson, probably said that wrong, research report. We're looking forward to 2021 and hope that COVID will allow researchers to get out in the field and to meet in order to do their research studies a little better than what they could last year. When it comes to regulatory affairs, we had quite a bit of engagement in that we provided testimony to the Water Quality Control Commission stating that the best management practices that are in place currently are accomplishing the Regulation 85 goals and that there's no need to regulate farms. We provided input on the Grain Handlers Act sunset review process to provide better protection for producers. And we kept lawmakers and elected officials informed about trade inequities and other challenges during COVID-19. We also, like I said, informed the corn producers of what was going on with the virus and the regulatory issues facing them in the corn industry. For market development, we funded an animal protein article that got a lot of impressions, 226 million, in fact. It was called the 9 Sustainable Eating Facts. We saw a huge impact from this and great return on investment. We also partnered with Nebraska Corn Board and Colorado Corn Commission, or excuse me, the Kansas Corn Commission to promote E15 through the Look for the Blue Hose campaign. For those of you who have not heard of this, we have a website available, www.lookforthebluehose.com, to learn more. Log on and see what the committee is doing on producers' behalf, promoting ethanol on E15. For trade, we had 2 CCAC directors represent Colorado on a mission to promote Colorado corn to foreign buyers. Also, we had a virtual farm tour of an ethanol plant with over 40 corn buyers from 9 Latin American countries. And we continued our partnership with U.S. Grains Council, USMEF, and NCGA. We currently have 3 board members who participate with U.S. Grains Council as members and who are active members of their action teams, being trade policy, Western Hemisphere, and the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia action teams. We also have a member on USMEF and are proud to say that we have a board member of NCGA and Mike Lefevre. We also partnered with U.S. Grains to host a successful trade school in Burlington, Colorado, with more than 60 producers discussing global trade and how it impacts Colorado and our products. And we also have our ongoing biweekly Kernels newsletter, which is sent to more than 2,500 people, and our quarterly magazine, the Corn Quarterly, sent to more than 5,000 people. If you would like to sign up for these newsletters, please log on to our website, coloradocorn.com, to sign up for our communications that we offer. And we also have on our website a survey for producers to take to tell us what we're doing well, what we can improve on, and to tell us where your priorities lie. We are looking at updating our strategic plan here in the next few months, and we'd love to hear from producers and to get your take on what we need to be looking at in our plan that we'll make for the next 3 to 5 years. So this concludes our, I guess, year in review. Like Nick said, I'll provide a link to the annual report in the chat if you want to look that up, and please feel free to ask any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Yes, so I'm going to launch another poll. So please take a few seconds to go ahead and fill that out. What area do you believe provides the greatest value to Colorado corn producers that the Colorado Corn Administrative Committee does? We've got really 4 buckets, 4 pillars that we focus on. And as Jeremy says, we're hoping to really hone in on how that mission and values and goals can be reached for the benefit of our corn producers across the state. Again, there are a way, or you can ask questions. You can either raise your hand. If you find that down in the bottom part of the Zoom window, you can click raise hand and we'll look to try and get you to ask a question, or you can click on the Q&A portion of the window and raise a question in that if you have any for Jeremy or myself. So we'll give this poll a few minutes to go in before we close that poll out.
Well, Nick, I want to say that it's just quite unfortunate that over the past year, we haven't been able to meet as a board in person. But I want to commend you on your ability to get all this technology together and to, despite the restrictions that we're under, to really go out and meet all the board members, get to know everyone who's involved with Colorado Corn. And I know you've expressed that you're looking forward to getting out in the country and meeting with producers. And we sure hope that here soon that's going to be a possibility. Sorry.
Is that $1 in the kitty, Jeremy?
I believe so. I think it happened every meeting.
No, thank you, Jeremy. And at the start of this, one of my goals was to actually spend a lot more time out in the areas where the corn is produced, to be a part of your communities, to bring the information to your communities and to where you're at, rather than the area where we're at. I think it's imperative to really get a feel for what our producers need and what our producers want. And the best way to do that is to be present where you're at. And so unfortunately, if anybody knows me, and there's a few people I see on this webinar that do know me, I love to be around people. I'm as much of an extrovert as you can get. And having to really pull back our activities and not go out and be able to meet in person. I would like to take our board meetings out to the countryside rather than bring them to the Front Range. I believe it allows us to do our work efficiently and allows us to have another touch point in the communities with producers and allows them easier access to come to our meetings and see what we do and hear what we do and ask questions of our programs. And so really looking forward to seeing the time where we can, and we're getting close to that, where we can all get back together and meet, where we can go to seminars in person, where we can have something like this in your local community, because we do know that broadband connectivity for something like this is an issue in areas. And there's just something about being in person that allows connectivity between people to happen better than it does across the screen and on a camera. And so very much looking forward to enacting that. Very much looking forward to our strategic planning sessions that the board's going to be taking part of. And so, yes, please do fill out those surveys. We've gotten quite a few of them in. We've gotten over 70 responses so far, almost 80, I believe. And really put your comments in there. Put your thoughts down. We know we put a lot of multiple choice questions in there, and we can garner a lot of information from that. But what we really like is your candid reviews and your candid thoughts on what we're doing well, what we could improve on, and where you would really like this organization that's here for you as the producers to focus our time and our resources. So it's been a pleasure for this last year or so. I picked a heck of a time to jump in, but it's been great. And I can't say thank you enough for selecting me and from the committee and the board as well. So looks like we've got about 13 of 19. So if you haven't taken a chance or taken an opportunity to fill out the poll, I'll give it another 30 seconds and be happy to take any questions from any of the audience for Jeremy or myself on anything that we're doing, any place you'd like a little more explanation or just some comments, we'd be happy to hear as well. All right, we'll go ahead and we'll close that poll out and we'll share the results. And it looks like the big winner here is market development, with 50% of our participants thinking market development is providing the greatest value. And from my perspective, this is almost like your children. You don't want to pick between them because you shouldn't have a favorite, but there are different things that bring value to our producers, and I think each one of them does. But it's good to know from the people on this today where they find that value, and that is definitely in market development. And I think we've got some great things going on to help promote corn and our market development, whether it be through new uses of corn. We've got the Consider Corn Challenge coming from NCGA, where we're looking for new uses of corn, to the things we're working on at the state with Look for the Blue Hose and really promoting E15 because it's better for our rural economy, better for your pocketbook, and better for the air that we breathe. Hoping to increase sales of E15, which we've actually seen increase sales in the Colorado Springs market that we're doing our marketing. and through the promotion of our livestock industry, because as was mentioned in our previous panel, a lot of the corn, 85% of it or so, goes to livestock in the state of Colorado. So it's good to know the opinions and know the thoughts of our producers here on this survey today. So thank you so much for that. Would be happy to entertain any questions. We've got about 3 minutes left before we move into our next presentation with Lanny Houston. Any questions, raise your hand or throw them up in the chat.
I guess one thing too, Nick, I didn't mention, CCSC did sell their building in Greeley, and we've expressed intent to move down to the stock show center area, move into the livestock exchange building. We're excited to do that. And from all that we've heard, it really sounds like it's going to be a unique area to agriculture, and really an area that we'll be proud to be a part of. I've heard even praise as high as saying that's going to be the new Silicon Valley of agriculture. So looking forward to that. Hopefully in the next year we'll be moved in and ready to see what all they do with the area.
Yep, it'll be a great opportunity to influence the future of agriculture, not just here in Colorado, but probably across the nation. And really resume a great partnership with Colorado State University. They've got an innovation center going on down there for agriculture and food, and that is a great a place where we need to be to have our influence on it, so that our producers have a voice. And also, they're turning it into a year-round educational site, and so you're going to see children come through here, not just during the stock show, but year-round, to learn about agriculture, learn about STEM in agriculture. And it's a great opportunity for us to have a touch point with many, many kids who don't get the opportunity to see what a farm or see what agriculture is each and every day. And so very much looking forward to this opportunity to partner with CSU, with our friends in the livestock industry, with Colorado Cattlemen and the Land Trust and the Colorado Beef Council, as we continue to try and do good work for the corn producers here in the state of Colorado.